Right. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Let's wait for some other people to show up. Um, doesn't look like that many people. Shane is starting to join. Hassan.
Did you see the eclipse last night, Sheikh? Well, it was night for us in Toronto.
No, I didn't because it was overcast here, so you couldn't see anything. We had a bit of a drizzle, which is a bit disappointing, but that's okay. I've seen quite a few of these things in my time. Um, so yeah, sorry about last week, but if you watched the news, we had a bit of an event, a major weather event happening here. A cyclone came our way, except thankfully, as it made landfall, it was no longer a cyclone, but a very severe tropical storm. But even still, it did a lot of damage, at least on the coastline here. You got erosion in some parts of the beach around this parts that like are dropping from 20 to 30 feet down. So these beaches are destroyed. It's going to take billions of dollars to dredge up sand and smooth them out again and make it. It's also dangerous because if the erosion comes any more forward, a lot of the buildings and the homes in that area will just sink. So it'll create like, landfills and sinkage and that sort of things. It's just all around disaster. But there are more of these on the way, according to climate scientists. And anyone who's a climate change denier should maybe make a special trip down here and take a look for themselves, because these hurricanes are not supposed to be coming this far south of the equator. The waters here are usually a lot colder to fuel these cyclonic and hurricane kind of events. But these waters are warming up. The climate is warming up, and nobody's doing anything about it. Governments are still dragging their foot, being lobbied by corporations to just basically drag their foot on climate change. But anyway, here we are back in our 8th session. So we're going to read today section 11 and 12 of the Wisdom of the Throne. Before I start, someone wrote to me saying that they have a real problem with Sabzavari, that it's so dense, that's even more dense than Mulla Sadra. I don't disagree with that. Yeah, Sabzavari is dense, and this is not just Izutsu's translation. The original itself is quite dense as well. So, as I mentioned from the very beginning, Sabzavari is a supplementary reading. You're not required to read it. Our course is basically the Wisdom of the Throne. But because there's overlap in the discussions between the Wisdom of the Throne and Sabzavari's Shahr Manzume, the commentary on the philosophical poem, I thought it was a good idea, to read these two texts together. Originally, my intention was to include the commentary of Sheikh Ahmed Al-Ahsai on the Wisdom of the Throne, but my notes are all over the place, and it would just take too long to put them all together. But eventually, I will do that. So anyway, because I have my own views on Ahsai's commentary on this text that I think are his commentary is so off, and it's so biased that it requires a response in its own right. That not only is he not properly commenting on this philosophical text, but in certain places he is basically saying the same thing from a slightly different phraseology, while then condemning Mulla Sadra for that position. So, but this is a long commentary by Ahsai. It's about 3 volumes in the current edition of it. So if I ever do that, it'll be probably a life work. Anyway, so let's get started with this. Section 11, principle concerning his names, may he be exalted. God, may he be exalted, said, and he taught Adam all the names. And he, may he be exalted, said, and God's are the most lovely names or beautiful names. So call him by them. Asma al-Husna. I don't know why he's translated al-Husna as lovely. But anyway, know that the world of the divine names, the world is a world of exceedingly vast extent, containing all the essential realities in their primordial and fully elaborated form. These are the keys of the unseen and the foundation of his detailed knowledge of all existing things, as in his saying, may he be exalted, and with him are the keys of the unseen. No one knows them but him. For there's nothing that is not to be found among his names, may he be exalted. Their individual essences exist through the being of his essence in a manner more lofty and exalted than the quiddities of contingent things. This is a reiteration of what we read in the Fusus al-Hikam. He's basically talking about the immutable archetypal essences. And they are necessary through the necessity of his essence, the same argument as in the first chapter of the Fusus. Just as the quiddity of a contingent thing exists through the being of that contingent thing and is made to exist accidentally through God's granting of being, except that the essentially necessary being has no quiddity, since he's the pure reality of being, unmixed with any degree of privation with regard to which he might not fully exist. Right? This is a very key argument because a lot of the misunderstandings that we have on the primacy of being, as something that Christian Jean Bay points out in his book, is that the mind, for some reason, cannot grasp this primacy of being without positing some kind of quiddity to being. And so what Mulla Sadra is here doing is just completely stripping that totally. God has no quiddity. Or if you want to put it another way, his being is his quiddity, right? His wujud is his mahiyya. But it is not a mahiyya. It's not how we understand the concept of an essence or a quiddity or a thingness, because God is not a thing. This knowledge of these names is part of wisdom withheld from all but those who are worthy and specially deserving of its attainment. The perfect ones among the people of spiritual intuition and true inner knowledge. These names are not the words and expressions that can be heard, God, Allah, the Merciful, Ar-Rahman, and so forth. Rather, these audible expressions are the names of those names, which we also read in the Fusus. Those concerned with this knowledge verified and recorded a great many matters concerning it, following the philosophical order in the manner of the official, that is, peripatetic philosophy, according to principles, subjects, fundamental and subsidiary divisions, topics, and particular ends. For his magnificent names can be divided into substances and the accidents into the 9 categories of quantity, quality, place, position, time, relation, state, action, and affection. Why? Because these names are supposed to have effects. That's why we can do that with the names. But the entirety of these names are simple elements of the intellect, meaning universal intellect, existing through the one being of the essentially necessary being. This multiplicity in unity is among the wondrous marvels of the secrets of God's grandeur. For the sole reason is that we read in the Fusus al-Hikam, and as we read elsewhere in these sorts of high intellectual Islamic gnosis, that the names are the name. So whatever name you call the All-High by, that is the named, right? So in this sense, if you think about this relationship between the name and the name, that all the names are the name, then you begin to see in some sense the kind of mirage reality of the names in relation to the name, because they are the named. It's just our own perspective by which we look at the All-High that differentiates one name from another. So number 12, principle concerning the mode of God's activity of all or fail in relation to the world. The activity of every agent must be either by nature, by constraint, by subjugation, by intention, by immediate assent, by providential ordering, or by self-manifestation or self-disclosure. All but the first of these are completely involuntary. As for subjugation, that can neither be voluntary or involuntary. Now, the maker of the world acts by nature according to the atheist believers in an eternal and purely autonomous nature. These are I don't know why the Dahriya are not technically atheists, but, for our purposes, we'll call them that. The maker of the world acts by nature according to the atheist believers in eternal and purely autonomous nature, by intention with the motive according to some of the Mutazilite theologian, by intention without any separate motive according to most of the Asharat theologians, by immediate assent according to the Illuminationist philosophers, by providential ordering according to the peripatetic philosophers, and by self-manifestation, meaning tajalli, self-disclosure, according to the Sufis. Each one has a direction toward which he turns. Let them strive to be first in attaining the good things. And that was section 12, 11, and 12 of the Wisdom of the Throne that we were supposed to have read last week. And the floor is now open to anybody who has any questions, gripes, insights, revelations, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, so that verse from, or the ayah from Suratul Baqarah that he's quoting at the end, he's essentially just saying there that like all of these groups, they've sort of got a picture, not a picture, but they've got like a facet of the overarching gem that is God. So he's basically like, I just want to make sure I'm saying this right. He's basically saying that they all have like a valid perspective, right?
Yeah.
And also the atheists, could they also be considered like deist? You know, like people talk about deists.
I don't know. This word, the Dahriyun and the Dahriya in European and English translation always gets translated as atheist. I don't think it is entirely accurate to call the Dahriyun atheists in the way that we understand that concept today of people who don't believe in God. The Dahriyun during the Islamic period, at least the early Islamic period, believed in something akin to an unmoved mover, but believed in the eternity of the world to such an extent that Shahristani, for example, claimed that the Dahriyun are the remnants of the Zurvanists, the ancient Iranian Zurvanists who believed that infinite time was God. So they weren't exactly atheists in the way that we understand it, but the accusations that were hurled at the Dahriyun was that because of their belief in the eternity of time, they negated, the scriptural understanding of creatio ex nihilo that even the Quran, in some fashion, kind of upholds, and so they got called, unbelievers, and this term, once it enters the diction of Europeans, and especially in English and French and German translation, most of these scholars keep translating it as atheist. It is completely wrong, because these people had a notion of divinity. It was a kind of a sort of a material and sort of slightly pantheistic notion of God, where they identified time and God as being the same thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other one is that so he talks about how there's like these audible versions of the name, not these audible manifestations of the names. Then there's the name itself. This may be a practical question. So like, what's the point of dhikr if the names of the names aren't the names? How should this inform somebody's practice of dhikr?
This is a very valid question. It's a question I get asked in just on a practical level by people all the time. The way that we break it down for people, if you're merely just reciting a name, right, without trying to penetrate the meaning of the name, you're not really doing anything. Okay, you just basically parrot fashion reciting something. And this is a very common intellectual trap that people almost instinctively fall into, whether they are, Sufis or even, non-Sufis. The point of the exercise, and this is an assumption, it's something that's taken for granted and is usually not explained to people, is that when you are given a name to recite, or if you're reciting a name or contemplating a name, the contemplation is the key here, right? And what the recitation, the verbal recitation, is supposed to do is to reinforce that contemplation, right? So if you look at the audible, if the audible, whether it be the audible or the apparent, because people silently recite things without it being audible. But if you take the apparent as the husk, the point of the exercise is to penetrate that. So in a zikr situation, when you are sitting and reciting a zikr over and over and over and over again, in your mind, you're supposed to simultaneously be penetrating the meaning of this zikr. And the meaning of a zikr is not just one thing. It's not like a dictionary definition, because this meaning has a multifaceted, animate reality in the here and now, especially with you reciting it. So one of the exercises in more intermediate students of a tariqah are given is that while you are reciting the zikr, you are to visualize something along with it, whether the name itself, a symbol, or something. Then as you advance further in this practice, then you integrate that into the contemplation of that name, both unifying everything within you, as well as then delineating and explaining the phenomena around you simultaneously. And this takes a while to click in, but one of the reasons why people were traditionally put into halwas, into 40-day retreats, was precisely to deepen themselves in this sort of practice, such that then it becomes you attain a sort of unitary event in your horizons, in your outside world, and within yourself, where the meaning, the reality, the animation of this name that is being recited within by you, all of these various boundaries begin to collapse, and that is when then you experience, the removal of the veils, experience of lights, and that sort of thing of union and all of that kind of stuff. Because on one level, we can say that duality is a sort of artificial superimposition of the mind, right? That ontologically there is no duality, right? But duality holds necessity, which Ibn Arabi explained at the very beginning of the Fusus al-Hikam. There was a part of in a sense, the evolution of wujud, without that concept, without the connotations of that concept of evolution. Part of the evolution of wujud, right, the hidden treasure wishing to be known, was to create a mirror where it could contemplate itself as an other, right? So these practices, and in the sense that I just said, where you're not just verbally reciting the name over and over again and then waiting for the effect without trying to penetrate all the meaning levels and all the meaning events associated with that. That's what you're doing. You're penetrating into this, such that then you, as they say, the zakir, the invoker, the zikr itself, and the maskur, the one that is invoked, become a singular reality, and this duality between subject and object completely collapses in that experience, in the experience event.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The practice here is extremely important, and especially for an author like Mulla Sadra, because a lot of the philosophizing that he's doing, more often than not, this is something that Hassan Zadeh al-Muli kind of glossed in one of his commentaries on the Asfar, that with Mulla Sadra, you shouldn't take the philosophizing for granted, that what he's saying here is connected to this sort of experience, or what he's saying here philosophically has something to do with this practice here. So these things, because he's, in this particular book, the whole wisdom of the throne is about that noetic knowledge of the union of the intelligizer with the intelligible, and what this is all supposed to mean. This is what this is all about. Anybody else? Hussein, Hassan, Jeff, anybody?
What does say intention? How would that be regarded as involuntary?
Intention.
Yeah. Says all but the first three of these are completely involuntary.
Oh, okay. All right. Intention. Okay.
I was thinking about that too. I was wondering if it was a mistranslation, because all of those sound like involuntary.
No, this is according to the
first three.
Mutazilites. The Mutazilites, this is not Mulla Sadra's views. This is the view of the Mutazilites. His own view is something else, which he's going to get to in the next section. Yeah, this is a bit of a thorny issue with the Mutazilite theologians, that they believe that irada is involuntary, right? That when something is intended, it is not a voluntary intending. So it's one of the really strange elements of their theology. But this is not actually Mulla Sadra's own view, because Mulla Sadra does subscribe to the seven creative attributive inference, and the will of God is a voluntary act. It's the fiat itself, be and it is. God is not involuntarily, issuing an edict of be and it is. It's a very completely voluntarist act. Although one can say from a kind of a, classical Neoplatonic angle, from another vantage point, the one cannot but, overflow out of itself. Mulla Sadra does subscribe to that because he was a careful reader, a lifelong reader of the, theology of Pseudo Aristotelians, but this is not his view. He does, the intention of the maker is a voluntary act with Mulla Sadra himself. This is the view of the Mutazilites that he's basically putting as to what they believe. Mutazilism has a extremely strange, in some parts of it. I mean, they were trying to de-anthropomorphize God in comparison to their enemies, that they ended up in a place, in my opinion, that was even more radically, how should one put it, square in their conception of God than the Peripatetics. The God of the Mutazilite is almost like a, deistic machine. It's not real. It's just like a principle, and it's out there, and nothing is like it, and nothing that we project onto it has any bearing to it, to the point that then through their own reasoning, they had to come to a place that even stripped divine intention as a voluntary act of the Godhead. This is a very strange place that they ended up. But this is why they elicited some of the very strong reactions that they did in their opponents. And to some degree, their opponents on some of these points are correct.
So would it be like God spent 6 days creating, the world or the universe, and on the seventh rested, and then rested thereafter?
Well, that's then the more radical anthropomorphic literalist view, which is equally problematic. Then the view of the Mutazilite that engaged in this ta'til process, this stripping process. So with Mulla Sadra, as with most of the Sufis, and specifically with Ibn Arabi, there's the attempt to bridge the problems with these two conceptions of what God is and isn't. On the one hand, yes, everything that we project about God, even on the level of intention, is our own human projection of what we understand by that concept. Yet, by the same token, God has intention. On the one hand, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, if you take it literally, is a very silly concept. On the other hand, as with Ibn Arabi, there's a creation and recreation happening at each instant. So we can say the creatio ex nihilo at that level is true. Or if you want, from the perspective of Mulla Sadra's teacher, Mir Dalmad, there's a atemporal origination of the world that then projects itself or emanates itself into the material universe. And that's his explanation of the 6 days of creation, in a very deep philosophical, but ultimately Aristotelian kind of context, the atemporal origination of the world, where then God and his eternity and the eternity of a world is with God is held, while simultaneously we can then assert the atemporality of this world and it's in its origination in a time, as it were. That was Mir Dalmad's resolution to this problem. So, but if we take either of those two extremes, very extremes, the extreme on one side with the Mutazilite and then the extreme on the other side, say with the Asherites, or not even the Asherites, but just a common, non-Asherite, non-Mutazilite theologian, each of these positions is laden with its own problems. So this existentialist tendency that Ibn Arabi begins and then culminates and flowers ultimately with Mulla Sadra, wants to basically synthesize all these contradictions and offer a third kind of resolution where these statements are true based on the ontological standpoint in which they are asserted. So on the one hand, God is eternal and the world is eternal on that level because it exists as an intelligible in the mind of God. But on the other level, it is generated in its actual existence in time at each moment. So there is a creative ex nihilo as well, simultaneous. Obviously, this kind of answer doesn't satisfy the Orthodox believer, but it does resolve the problem.
Thanks.
Sure. Hassan, anything you want to say?
So the first thing, if we can go back again to the phrase, the names of the names. First, can we say the names, they are something, again, like the Platonic ideas, which produce their effect in the world. And then the names of the names, they are the audibles which Mulla Sadra speaks about.
Okay, let's go back to our reading of Ibn Arabi, right? The names of the names are what? They are the ayana thabita, the primary ayana thabita that are the primary intelligibles in the mind of God. These are the reality of the names, right? Which are without number. According to Ibn Arabi, it's not just 99 names, they're without number, innumerable, infinite, right? Then, but these intelligibles, these names, these asma al-husna in the mind of God are God. Because on that intelligible level, they are neither existent or non-existent. So they are necessary, wajib, in relation to them being thought by God, right? As part of its reality. So they have that essence of wajibiyah. But they become contingent in the sense that they take on their individuated forms as they manifest in a certain reality, right? But in every instance, ultimately, the name, al-is musamma, the name is the name. It's the same reality. It's the Allah subhanahu, or Allah is even a name itself, Does that make sense?
Yes. And the second one, again, related to the names, that maybe somehow counterintuitive, but he's saying that the gradation of the names or the relation between them goes exactly according the way the philosopher they are describing the hierarchy between the Jawhar and the Arat and so on, the different level of existence in the world.
Mm-hmm. What this is trying to tell us is number one, that these gradations between a name establish this whole articulation of being, or the tashkik fil wujud, right? wherein each particular name, because it holds a particular reality of an instantiation of a particular reality, is flowing from that haraka, that movement of being that creates these articulations, and then that are experienced by us and are known by us as the reality or the self-manifestation of a given name, right? Like, for example, I don't know, just one example. You have a road rage experience, right? A road rage experience is the reality of what divine name? It's the reality of the divine name, Al-Qahar, or Al-Maghzub, or Ghazib, or whatever, the angry one, right? That is the manifestation of that name. You come home to your wife and she's smiling at you, and your heart opens and you give her a hug and give her a kiss, blah blah blah. What is that? The manifestation of which name? That is the Basit, and all the rest of the names are Rahman, all of those kinds of names. So that is and this is sort of on the practical level what these guys are trying to indicate to us on the philosophical level, especially given the fact that we're dealing with this as above, so level above, so below kind of reality with their words. So there is a gradation to the names because each name is articulating within a flowing hierarchy a specific reality of the name itself. Other than the two names, according to Ibn Arabi, other than the two names of Allah and Rahman, which are the two comprehensive names. Both are the universal realities of everything.
Okay, thank you very much.
I've been reading Fazl Rahman's book just to get some more like synoptic view of Mulla Sadra, because I mean I like the slow reading that we're doing, but I feel like I'm missing a bigger picture. So I guess I've been thinking about Mulla Sadra on like the big picture level, and just one of the thoughts that I've been having is that all of these categories, like a substance, an accident, universality, particularity, genus differentia, and I think even necessity and contingency are all they're all mental.
Absolutely.
And I think this,
yeah,
yeah,
completely. There are superimpositions. They don't possess a reality. It's because our human minds have to discriminate between things. We superimpose these categories on the world, but other than themselves, these things don't have essential existence at all. Yeah, they're mental completely.
Yeah. I think he calls them secondary intelligibles.
Yeah.
And he mentions it in the first chapter, but the one category that it's just reading him becomes kind of difficult, because it seems that because he's writing from, like, the fact that he's writing, he's thinking, he's using his dhihin, and we as readers are also using our dhihin to read it, and so he's expressing something that is beyond the mind in terms of language. So then he keeps going back, and so then he'll say, like in this chapter, he says that the quiddities exist through their existence accidentally, but they're not technically accidents either. I mean, and wujud is not a substance, right?
Exactly.
And so it's like we almost have to like erase, like, after you read it, you have to like erase what you learned, because it's not actually referring to wujud.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. Yeah, but that book by Fazlur Rahman has its pluses, but he, because of his own kind of rationalist and sort of peripatetic leaning kind of approach to Mulla Sadra, in my opinion, doesn't quite do justice to Mulla Sadra. Christian John Bate, in my opinion, does a far better job at that, and especially in that second chapter of his book, he is just outstanding. Then in that third chapter, where he's talking about the Avicennan moment, he then kind of, pits these two worldviews together, and where Mulla Sadra is an Avicennan, where he's not, and where he augments, the Avicennan universe. Fazlur Rahman doesn't really do that. At least not to my satisfaction, he didn't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he has a more Avicennian reading of Sadra. He says that Avicenna is the most important for Sadra. I don't know if that's true.
Which is a typical statement, from a mashriq leaning person. Yeah. I mean,
the one thing,
important, but he's.
Yep.
I mean, to call him a Rais, in my opinion, is the Sheikh al Rais. Okay, maybe for some, but I don't think so. Many others don't.
I mean, but just in terms of the concepts that we use, I mean, like we get all like substance, accident, necessity, contingency, like all of that is coming out of. Well, it's coming out of Aristotle, but
it's coming out of Aristotle in the greater Hellenistic, peripatetic Platonic tradition as a whole, and how it was treated subsequently to them. So he didn't invent those, but the way that Avicenna detailed this, whether in the Najat or the Shafa, etc., it was very novel, and it's the novelty that Avicenna introduced to this treatment really set a very important course of discourse in Islamic philosophy for the next 1,000 years. But whether he is a Rais, I mean, I think Al-Farabi is in some respects far more attuned to certain questions of ontology than Avicenna is. Avicenna sometimes waffles on certain questions, like on the question of being, where he doesn't quite, he just cannot, strip this accidental nature from being, from wujud, even though he's really wanting to make it primary. With Farabi, even though Farabi is not not an esalat al-wujudi, but his treatment of this question, I think, is much more decisive than Avicenna's, even though I don't agree with his conclusion very much. Avicenna's good. He should be read. He should be understood, because in many ways, the subsequent story of Islamic philosophy is in many ways a response to Avicenna's, whether his brilliance or his, the opposite. Even to the point that even the Sufis, from even before Ibn Arabi, especially the ones in Andalusia, were forced by necessity to begin to respond to all of this stuff in this back and forth until we get, the school of Ibn Arabi himself and his, his own successor, Sadruddin Qunawi, that really made the synthesis, in a profound way.
Mm-hmm.
But whether he's the greatest, my jury has been out on that for a long time.
Well, one of the questions that this raises for me is if we include necessity and contingency also as being secondary intelligibles, the whole idea of wajib al-wujud seems really important for the tradition and for Mulla Sadra, and even the concepts of all the concepts. I mean, mutlaq, right? I mean, absoluteness, infinity, transcendence. So I'm trying to think of, how the experience of wujud could lead one to asserting certain things linguistically about wujud. And absoluteness makes sense, because if you have an experience of a being that you can't experience, you're trying to experience it, but you can't grasp it, and it keeps leaving your grasp, then it makes sense why you would think that it would call it absolute, because it's absolving itself. It's like leaving your mind and your imagination.
All of these guys, from Ibn Arabi to Mulla Sadra and Sabzawari, would all say we are always experiencing that. The only difference is that, the Arif, or, the Hakim and Muta'allid, the theosophied sage, are aware of it. That is the only difference. So for them, even the state of being mahjub, of being veiled, is an experience of the absolute, but only from the modality of negation. Whereas the aware one is operating from the modality of the affirmation. So one abides in the la ilaha, the other one in the illah. One in the shade, the other one in the light. That is the only difference. We are always experiencing wujud. Always, right now, at this very moment. Wujud is, and it's itlaqi, in its absolutity, it is being experienced at this very moment. It's just that we, because of the way that the mind is wired, and especially as human beings are, acculturated and grow into, their humanity from being an infant, the duality just becomes ever more dense. And so then what the path is supposed to do, and even what philosophy is supposed to do from the perspective of Mulla Sadra, is to begin to unpack all of that. So such that everything that we think about the world is in essence a projection, and so a secondary intelligible that has no reality. But for a functioning human being, that is a very difficult thing in itself to try to grasp, that everything that I'm projecting about the world out right now at this very moment is an illusion, of my own creation. I'm projecting. And then the question is why? And then that is the path. That is the path back to the fitra. And back to, the maqam al-wujud, as the Sheikhs call it, which is the maqam al-fu'ad.
The question of the necessity and contingency makes me think of, and that's the one that I puzzle over is the necessity, is because I think one finds in European philosophy and like continental philosophy this, I think what we can call an encounter with like this absolute wujud, and you find it in the existentialists, but they all seem to be agreed that this is like an awful experience. Like Sartre and Heidegger, it's not pleasant. It's a feeling of not of necessity, but of contingency.
You want to know why? Because in their experience of it, or even their conjecture of the experience of it, they're losing their individualism. They're losing their individuality. So this concept of fana to the egoic, consciousness of Western philosophy is terrifying. Whereas to the Eastern mind that is trying to strip itself and return back to its fitra, this is to be welcome. So this has been always an open book to me, why someone like Jean-Paul Sartre is recoiling in absolute terror at the possibility of such an experience. Whereas, the Sufis or Mulla Sadra Ibn Arabi or the sages of India or China, etc., are running headlock in sheer exuberance towards it. And that tells you a lot about the philosophical types or the spiritual types that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Thank you. That clarifies it. That's because I was been puzzling over this. I'm like, why is it? It has to be something to do with them, right? It's nothing to do with wujud.
No. And so then this is probably a great place to kind of take that whole concept of the reign of quantity that Guénon talks about in his book, and see for yourself that at least on that paradigm that he discusses in that book, he's correct. Between quality and quantity, and how the consciousness of Western materialist civilization is a quantitative. And so a quantitative consciousness holds on to itself as a real, its base veiled ego, as its most precious asset. And anything that tries to destroy that is to be ran away from. This is why, I often find it really frustrating having debate with, American libertarians when we're having a political discussion. I mean, they can't get their heads around how, like in countries like Canada or Europe or here in Australia, that we have a welfare system and we expect this welfare system to take care of us. That there's, at least to some degree still an operating free medical system. You know, you have a card the government gives you. You go to your local doctor or GP or whatever, and you know he sees you and whatever, and you even get subsidized for medicine. They can't get their head around that. This is socialism. This is bad. And then you try to get them to. So why is this? Well, because I don't want the government, you know, to do X, Y, and Z. So well, then why have a government at all? Why pay taxes? Why do anything? Who's going to take care of it? You're not a doctor. Can you administer to yourself if you're, you know, is X, Y, and Z is wrong with you? No. So then what's your problem? And they don't have an explanation for that. But this whole loss of identity and being vulnerable to something about themselves is the mentality. And there's a inverted ontological outlook that I found in discussions with these people. It's that this cult of individualism that the West has been breeding progressively since the period of enlightenment, in a sense, is a talhut. It's the shaitan itself. And this is why, you know, it can then project out into the world a dead matter that it is responsible for exploiting and destroying and corrupting and all the rest of it. Just in my view, is completely Iblisian. You know, and it is Iblisian also from this angle, is that because it wants to bow to its own mind, it wants to prostrate, make sujud to its own mind as its own God. And worshiping one's intellect in the way that these philosophers like Sartre and all the rest of them do is Iblisian. This is, you know, your mind is not where it's at. So it's a constricted, temporary construct and projection of your own self in a limited duration. There's something way beyond that. The cogitor is not you. The cogitor is something way beyond you. So they recoil in terror. It scares the hell out of them. Because it means loss of control.
Within the same vein. Oh, sorry. Go on. Please go
No,
on.
go. You go. No, go ahead.
I'd
Go
rather
ahead.
I'd rather you go. 'Cause I've spoken quite a bit. So
Well, I just wanted to jump in here and say, like, it's really a confusing situation when you have in the West, when you have you know, the whole the Jungian idea of individuation and like the whole New Age / spiritual paradigm of Western spirituality is based on this idea of self-individuation and becoming, you know, becoming in terms of a distinct individual. And for some reason, I think there's a lot of pride, maybe people attached to that idea, like
But just hold on a
you know,
minute.
personal.
Jung
go ahead.
was a Gnostic, right? And this process of individuation in Jung is actually Platonic. He's not saying that this, you know, you're individuating towards something that you aren't right now, right? So implicitly, in a sense, Jung is actually subscribing to a Satrian concept of transubstantial motion, of a movement of an individual substance towards its final individuation. But that individuated being is moving towards a sort of a internal, already always archetype of itself that it has presently not attained yet. And it is not that. And in its present moment, as it is moving towards that, it has not become that yet. So to, you know, to worship the self, as we find in the West, and as you particularly find in the New Age movement, is kind of the invertedness of all of this. But Jung is not suggesting remotely anything. But Jung's approach to this is, in my opinion, give or take a few terminology that he uses and some of the faulty logic here and there. But overall, I think he is right about that. And he's not putting carts before horses as these people do. Like, for example, in New Age, the concept of God has been thrown out, or even a first source, right? But yet everyone is so desirous to have been somebody in a previous lifetime, right? So it's just, you know, in their spirituality, they are cultivating the ego, the base ego. Whereas the whole point of the exercise is to transform alchemically the ego, you know, through this process of you know, dissolution and coagulation, constant, you know, solve a coagula of the base ego until it flowers into the alchemical stone, which is very Jungian, and also alchemical. They don't understand this concept. So they're always fixated on the past lives, you know. But then you want to get them, you know, you want to draw them into a philosophical discussion. If, you know, you had all these past lives, what is the, you know, what is the ultimate ontological substrate that makes this reoccurrent transmigration of yourself even possible? And they can't wrap their heads around, because that discussion leads them again to a first source, the concept of God, right? However you want to call it. Okay. So even in their adherence, a lot of these people, you know, love Buddhism. But Buddhism, and especially in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that these people all try to associate themselves with, the sophisticated, deep philosophical discussions that occur ultimately lead Buddhism itself to a sort of Vedantic understanding of existence. You know, they don't quite call it Brahman, but Nagarjuna's Shunyata, the void, might as well be God by any other name. And I defy anyone to prove this to me otherwise. And I've read through the philosophy of the middle way in 3 different translations that have been made available. And every time I have read it, you know, it's like, this is straight Vedanta, Mulla Sadra, all of our own philosophers, just that the terminology is different. What we call Allah, they call Shunyata, the void. And then you point this out to these people, and they just don't like that. Why? Because they have a problem with the very concept of source and God, all of that. Right? Which is, again, this projection of this egoity, and it's, you know, clinging to this dear life. Whereas someone like Mulla Sadra is positing a very interesting perspective on this. When we accede to the reality of transubstantial motion, right? Then at any moment, the ego has the possibility for self-transformation, such that self-transformation now puts it on a level above the level it was previously. So that at that level above, you can even say that you are not the ego that you were at that previous level, and so on and so forth, right? That possibility is there. But to accept this paradigm would also then lead one to accept that what we understand as the base ego is not our identity, and that this concept of identity itself is an insidious concept, right? It is an insidious concept from the point of view of every esoteric tradition, because they are telling you that there's only one identity, and that's the supreme identity. And so that any particular thing that you identify yourself, whether this be mentally, materially, or otherwise, is a trap. It's a veil. You know, there's a kind of a metaphysical critique of identity politics for you right there, right?
Perfect.
Yeah. You know, if you are not identifying with the supreme identity, the Atman, or whatever term you want to use for that, then you are in illusion. You are drowning the world of samsara. And it's as simple as that. And yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
It's a great answer. I love that. Very good answer. And yeah, so I think there's a real point of confusion in Western spirituality in general, is this whole idea of like, what does it mean to be an individual? And, you know, like the whole individuality. I mean, it's sacred. That's the sacred cow for Western spirituality, is essentially, as you said, it's the ego is ultimately the thing that's being elevated and exalted, and which is a reversal, you know, obviously, of the whole the real exercise. An inversion. There's your inversion of Western spirituality versus vis-a-vis Eastern.
Yeah, but
and
on the same token, and these people accept this, you know, ultimately the journey, you know, what the New Age wants to know: what does it mean to be an individual? Well, what it means to be an individual is to be divine. So they say, oh yes, we absolutely accept it. I am God. Fine, so long as you experience that totality and understand the ontological, you know, bedrock of what that means. Go for your life. Call yourself God as much as you want. I agree. And I testify to your truth, you know. But that's not what's going on. This is just the gimmick of performance. And this is the problem, because when there's an absence of an ontology, then your spirituality becomes essentially performance.
Yeah.
And an idol. That's it. Yeah.
And I just wanted to say one other thing about you mentioned the projection, the egoic projection versus the world, and you used the word illusion. And I just wanted to differentiate. Would it be, do you think, acceptable to think of, well, the world is not an illusion. It's your projection is the illusion. So like to differentiate, because the word illusion is one of these words that it kind of rubs me the wrong way because it's
Well,
used to justify so many
this
philosophical
is
abuses.
this
It's
is
just
like
you just
well, just wait. Um, this is like the classic question they ask in first year philosophy. If there's no one in the forest to hear the trees fall, are the trees still falling? If illusion is the projection of the mind, then the category world that is occurring from the mind is likewise an illusion. Yes or no?
well, yes.
Okay.
However, there is a reality to which we're
Or
attaining and aspiring to attain or know, and so there's another tricky thing to differentiate, which of course is the point. Another one of the points of this exercise is to learn how to differentiate between the real and the unreal with the illusion,
yeah,
because
which
ultimately that's
which
what you mean when you say illusion. You mean unreal,
yeah,
fundamentally, ultimately, right?
which is the greatest, I think, single and succinct articulation of this is found in the Upanishads, the neti neti, not this, not that, right? The sages say that all is Brahman, but not this, not that. So, no matter what realization you get about Brahman, there's still this whole reality of neti neti, not this, not that. It's still operative on everything.
Right.
And even in the height of ecstasy, and I do this with myself always, even in the height of ecstasy, when you are, saying, Innani ana Allah, verily I am God, right? At the next moment, neti neti, right?
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
am and I'm not. There's this constant back and forth flow between negation and affirmation, right? And in that, if one does this very deliberately and as a spiritual praxis, the kind of things that then begin to disclose about the nature of reality are profound. Then even the desire to attain any station starts to drop, right? Everyone is desirous to attain a station of something rather than being something. This is what the final word of Ibn Arabi is saying. Don't try to attain any station. Or if you are, try to attain the station of no station, beyond which there's nothing. And there, stand still and contemplate the world. Where the I am God, God is God. All of these things become a singular thing. And this is, for lack of a better way of putting it, because these are the only categories that contemporary thought offers, but the panentheistic, not pantheistic, but panentheistic paradigm of the world is the correct one, where you have the best of all worlds. You have God containing all things both being God and not God simultaneously. God both being radically immanent in everything and present with everything, and simultaneously transcendent and beyond everything as well. Totally holographic in every conceivable way. And if you attain that station, then you have attained the goal of every religion. And it's only at that stage that you can actually say, I don't need a religion, contrary to what a lot of these New Agers say, oh, we're spiritual but not religious. Well, what does that even mean?
Yeah. It means you're going to make it up on your own and make your ego your Lord.
Yeah.
And everyone else's Lord too, if you can.
But there's so many different iterations of these kinds of things and these kinds of delusions that we're living with in this time. It's not just one or two. There's an infinity of iterations of it in every form. And this is why this humanity is presently in the state it is in. But what I put my finger on with the Western thought, and especially the Western existentialism, is that this loss of individual this circumscribed individual identity is something that everybody in this present civilization fears from. People think that they themselves are their most, highly prized assets. Whereas in previous civilizations, including in Europe, until a few hundred years ago, the chivalrous figure who was ready at any moment to sacrifice himself for, either his friends or his lady love or whatever was a paradigm that everyone adored. I mean, Jesus Christ himself says in the gospel, what is greater than for someone to sacrifice himself for his friends? And so he contextualizes his own crucifixion and death at Calvary as being a sacrifice for his friends. Rather than allow these apostles to be accosted and killed, he, walks forth and lets these people take him away to be killed. Right? That is the Christian paradigm. So I don't know what a lot of these other people are talking about.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah, sure thing. Anywho, let's leave that here for this week. Next week we have a long chapter. This section 13 is the longest of this first part. So we will get through this for the next sessions, a couple of pages too. But because we're kind of behind, I was originally going to split this up into two, but we'll just read this 13 section for the next session. And then the following week, we'll just finish the part one. And then the week after that, we'll begin on the part two of the Hikmet al-Arshiyya, right? So just get cracking into this. And like I said, Sabzavari is an optional recommended reading. If you find it too hard, just leave it. It's not that the focus here is the Wisdom of the Throne, not Sabzavari, but as a supplementary reading. If you really want to dig into the guts of these ideas that Mulla Sadra is talking about, this Shahr Manzoor, the commentary in the philosophic book, is a great place. But it is, I accept, it is quite dense in a few places, including in its translation. So if you don't want to read it, that's fine. There's no requirement to read it. Anyway, until next week, everybody have a good week, and hopefully there's no cyclones going through your area or hurricanes. Until we meet up again, ya Allah.